في عقد الأشعري وفقه مالك وفي طريقة الجنيد السالك.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف المرسلين وحبيب رب العالمين وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Bismillah, we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses this majlis, that He accepts from us the best of our deeds, and that He forgives us for the errors and the mistakes that we come upon in our majalis. We ask for al-fath wa tamkeen from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He makes us mutamakkinin, people who are concentrated and deeply rooted in this knowledge, that He opens the doors of clarity and nur on us, that He allows for us to be from ahl al-dhikri wal-fikri wal-ilm, and that He does not remove us from this path of righteousness. May He preserve us upon it until Yawm al-Qiyamah, for us and our dhurriyah, our lineage, children and progeny. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us, protects us in these times of fitan. We ask for protection from al-fitan, ma dhahara minha wa ma batan. The pursuit of fiqh, brothers and sisters, the objective is that we find ourselves in a ship of clarity. In a ship of clarity. It's very difficult because we see so many problems that are happening in the world. We even see victories and advancements, and then there come the question marks that come along with that victory or advancement. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delivers us to a time in which the ummah is upon righteousness, that the leaders are upon righteousness, that the people are righteous and good, and that the fitna that happens to be within our ranks is expunged and removed from us. Ameen. Alhamdulillah, the science of fiqh, studying fiqh, allows for clarity in terms of your practice. But without a rooted knowledge in Aqīdah, you will find yourself shaken when problems happen, and confused when there are issues and evil and fitna itself. So one must couple the study of fiqh with constant with the study of Aqīdah, with the study of Taṣawwuf, Aqīdah and Taṣawwuf. The people of Taṣawwuf, when practiced correctly, you find that these people, these individuals, they live a life of tawheed. They live a life of fiqh. That it's as if you were to take the books of Aqīdah and fiqh, and you see them right in front of your eyes. They live in a world of ahwal and ma'rifah. But the moment that they begin to say, we follow what is unseen, and we leave off what is seen, meaning that we follow our whims, so to speak, and we do not follow the Sharia and its rulings. These are Sufis that are upon a wrong path. The true Sufi is the one who learns fiqh and becomes firm in it, who learns Aqīdah and becomes firm in it, and is humble before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For the true Sufi knows that fiqh is the first step, is the priority in humbling oneself to their service with Allah, in their service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their obligations, their ta'ah to Allah. And Aqīdah is what draws the servant near to Allah Azza wa Jal and humbles them as well, knowing that فوق كل ذي علم عليم, that above everyone who has knowledge, or says that they have knowledge, or says they have wealth, or says they have power, is one who is even more powerful and more greater, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Ashir rahimahullah ونفعنا بعلومه وبعلوم مشايخنا في الدارين آمين قال فصل بموطن القرى قد فرضت صلاة جمعة لخطبة تلت. طيب, until like the end of the section. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to review the rulings in regards to Jum'ah prayer. The rulings in regards to Jum'ah prayer, as it comes after the section on as-sahw. Bismillah. As it comes after the section on as-sahw and fulfilling the obligations of prayer and any missed obligations. After the section on Salatul Jumu'ah, then we see Salatul Jama'ah, and we start to talk about the rulings of the Imam and the Muqtadi. So let's begin by reviewing the section on Salatul Jumu'ah. First, Salatul Jumu'ah. Al-Jumu'ah is derived from the word Jama'ah, which means gathering, as people gather for this prayer. So this is not a prayer like the other prayers in which, for example, one can pray Salatul Dhuhr technically alone. Lakin Salatul Jumu'ah, it must be prayed in Jama'ah. It must be prayed in congregation. It must be prayed in congregation. Bismillah. Sorry, my hold up now. Something's going on here. Okay. All right. I have what Apple does is, without even you asking for it, connects 4 screens of any devices that you have near it. And so typically what I try to do is I try to take my computer and project it on my monitor, but then I have an iPad with me sometimes for some extra notes or for viewing, and then somehow my iPad connected to my monitor some way. So I don't know. So just give me a moment here. Let me pull up the right page. Subhanallah. Bismillah. طيب. So we said that Jumu'ah is derived from the root Jama'ah. So the time of Salatul Jumu'ah begins from after the Zawal, and it is preferred to be prayed immediately after. Okay, and this time goes all the way to they say just before the time of Maghrib, just before the time of Maghrib, enough that it could be prayed, and at least one rak'ah of Asr could be prayed before sunset. That's the requirement. So technically speaking, if somebody wanted, if Asr was at 5 o'clock and Salatul Jumu'ah would take, let's say it takes 15 minutes, okay, and Salatul Asr, praying 1 rak'ah, that might take like a minute. So they would time it perfectly and say, 17 minutes before 5 o'clock. Technically, that's okay, right? So if they're praying at like 4:44, 4:40, right, that would be allowed. In order for Salatul Jumu'ah, in order for the other words that he uses here, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. The other words that he uses here, Sayyidina Imam Ibn Ashir, he says بِمَوْطِنِ. The word mawtin in باللغة العربية, it means a dwelling or a place of residence. He also says the word al-Qura. We know a famous city that is called al-Qura, Makkah al-Mukarramah. Al-Qura is a village, or is villages or towns, and qarya is the singular form of this word. And it's a village or a town is remarked by or is distinguished by the people who reside in it and the resources and so on. For example, if you're out in the middle of the desert and there are just some tents, that we wouldn't consider that a village, right? But for example, if we were to be driving around, maybe you drove 2 hours into the countryside, and then you saw a main street, and there'd be a general store, a schoolhouse, a couple of homes, maybe 3 or 4 farms, you would say, okay, this is a village, right? And a town hall, this is a village, okay? This would be considered a qarya. طيب. The obligation of Salatul Jumu'ah. There are 2 initial obligations that we should understand here. The first is shurut wujub and shurut ada. Okay? Shurut wujub and shurut ada. Shurut wujub are conditions of obligation, meaning that these are prerequisites that are beyond who? Beyond the individual's control, such as dhukuriyah, being a male. A female cannot do anything about being a male. She's not a male. Khalas. So the shart wujub on her for Salat al-Jum'ah is not there. In contrast, who is it upon? The dhakar, the one who is a male. Another example would be hurriya, freedom, right? Because a slave has no control, for example, over their freedom, right? This is why they're a slave, and vice versa. The second category, which are conditions of performance, or shurut ada. The shurut ada, these depend on the individual's ability, and they include delivering the khutbah and performing the prayer in congregation. So Sayyidina Ibn Abd Salam is a very important scholar in the Maliki school. Ibn Abd Salam. He distinguishes between the two, stating that what lies beyond one's capacity relates to obligation, while what is achievable pertains to al-ada, or performance. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمْعَةِ فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Here, the ulama استدلوا بهذا. They use this as a dalil to what? To distinguish that Salat al-Jumu'ah is a fard, that it is an obligation. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the obligation of attending Jumu'ah is upon every adult Muslim. And they say that from the wisdoms of Salat al-Jumu'ah is that it gathers the community together, and it emphasizes some communal worship. You're able to see the Muslims from all around the district or area or town that you live in, and it encourages what? It encourages people to be one ummah, and so on. The first condition that we come upon is from shurut ada. In order for it to be a valid Jumu'ah, the first thing is that the residency must be in a settled area, al-istitan. We call this al-istitan. So the first condition for the Jumu'ah's validity is that it is held in a settled area. Remember, we said the word al-qaryah, and he begins Ibn Ashir by saying the keyword al-mawtin, and this comes from the same root as al-istitan. The idea here is that Jumu'ah must be upheld in what type of place? In the type of place that is a settled city or district, and so on. So the details on this settlement include a village that we spoke about, right? There's like a general store, there's some towns. It's not like a very big place. It's not like a city, okay? The second type of place would be a city where it's large and there's hundreds or thousands of people, okay? And it could also be a type of metropolitan city where structures are densely packed together, and this is sometimes referred to as a Misr. This is where Egypt gets its name from, al-Misr. Bismillah. The second condition is that there must be a jama'ah. There must be a jama'ah. A jama'ah must consist of a minimum of 12 free adult men living or residing in that particular area, and they must attend the Jumu'ah itself. Some argue a minimum of 30. لكن يعني the most that I have seen, especially when like studying the other texts of the school, is 12. So we're going to be sticking with this number 12, because this is what I was taught from my teachers, and I don't want to stray away from this. The second matter is, or the next requirement, the next shart or obligation is the 2 khutbahs, the speeches. Al-khutbah has to be something that the Arab would consider a khutbah, meaning that it begins with like it has verses of Quran in it, it has praises of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there's some fa'idah in it, right? So the standard khutbah that we hear in alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضله فلا هادي له ونشهد أنه لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله, right? And to the end of the khutbah, to the end of the Arabic part of the khutbah, this would be considered the first part of the khutbah. Then the Imam would sit down. And then he would get back up, and then he would do salah and salam upon the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and maybe he would do a quick word and dua. It is recommended that the first khutbah is longer than the second khutbah. It's actually recommended that the second khutbah is simply just straight up dua. Okay, and it's further recommended that the khutbah is short and it does not extend for a very long time. It should be a very brief and direct message. And it should have at least 1 ayah of Quran in it. The next condition is that it must be in a jama'. A jama' is different than a zawiyah, different than a musalla, different than maybe a masjid in some cases. A masjid jama' is a large masjid in which the community gathers and congregates in. Not your corner masjid that might be, there's not like a distinct imam there, people kind of just volunteer to lead prayers and so on. Jum'ah would not be led there. Jum'ah must be led where? In a masjid with an appointed imam and so on. Okay? It cannot be conducted in a shack or an open field, for example. If we saw people praying in the middle of the mall, this is not a Jum'ah. If we saw people praying in the middle of a university, this is not a Jum'ah. If we saw people praying, for example, I don't know, in the middle of like a stadium, this is not a Jum'ah. Jum'ah must be prayed in a masjid jama'. Masjid jama' cannot be prayed in any other place. Okay. Number 4, from shurut ada al-Jumu'ah, is that the Jumu'ah itself must be led by an imam, must be led by a specific appointed imam. Okay. This imam must be free, he must be male, and he must be not traveling. What does it mean not traveling? At the very least, he is staying for longer than a period of 4 days in a place. Lakin yani he's a resident of that. We would consider him like a somebody who is not traveling. Okay. The purpose here is that the point here is that for the one who is traveling, Jumu'ah is not obligated on them. So if it's not obligated on them, then he must not be able to pray as an imam for that Jumu'ah, because it's not obligated on him. Jumu'ah is led and conducted and prayed with, and everybody involved in Jumu'ah, it's an obligation on them. All right. If you are not obligated to be in Jumu'ah, then you don't have to be there. So that is the primary requirement here. So the conditions that make Salat al-Jumu'ah obligatory, they include having a temporary, or I should say, being a temporary muqim. So the idea here is that the Jumu'ah has been originated, the Jumu'ah must be originated by permanent residents. Like in the individual who is a temporary muqim, what does that mean? That they're in a place for longer than 4 days, right? Or longer than 20 obligatory salah. So it's different than somebody who is a mustawtin. A mustawtin is a permanent resident, okay? And they intend to stay in that place permanently. So the other status of the one who is a musafir, so technically the one who is let me Let me backtrack a little bit. Let's say I'm visiting Mecca. Let's say I'm visiting Cairo. Okay, I plan to stay for a week. I plan to stay for a week. Right? My residence of over 4 days makes me what? Makes me obligated to attend Jumu'ah. If I go to Cairo and I plan to stay for 2 days before I move on to Alexandria, me being in Cairo for 2 days does not obligate Jumu'ah upon me, and I can move on. Okay? I would not, as a person who's staying in Cairo for 2 days, I would not be allowed to lead Jumu'ah. Versus someone who's staying for a week, maybe a month, they would have the ability to do so. They would have the ability to do so. Bismillah. طيب, the next matter, the next point here. The second sharat of wujub or condition of condition that makes Salat al-Jumu'ah obligation is not having a valid excuse. So number 2 is not having a valid excuse. What does this mean? If you are sick, if you are worried about your money and wealth, if you have a concern about, for example, the ruler being an oppressive ruler who may kidnap you from the streets, if there's any threat to your livelihood or safety, or possibly harsh weather and difficult conditions out of your home. Maybe there is a hurricane, maybe there is torrential rain, maybe there is heavy snow that can affect the roads, and so on. Jumu'ah is not obligated on you. Like, if you have nothing that prevents you from attending Jumu'ah, you are not sick, you are not incapable of leaving your home, you're safe, and so on and so forth. Jumu'ah is therefore an obligation. Number 3 is living within 3 miles, living within about approximately 3 miles and a third, which comes out to be like 5.37 kilometers from the closest masjid. If one lives outside of a city with a jama' masjid, if one lives outside of a city with a jama' masjid, then the nearest masjid for them, or the nearest Jumu'ah, that vicinity applies. So 3.3 applies to somebody who maybe you live in city A and there is no masjid in city A, but city B, which is within the 3 mile radius, has a masjid. So you would go to city B and pray in the masjid there. But if you are in city A and there's like 3-4 masajid, then this doesn't apply to you. You must go to one of those masajid. Okay. And even if that masjid in your city is 6 miles away, you're obligated to go to that masjid. The final obligation here is being male. So again, children are not obligated to go to Jumu'ah. Females are not obligated to go to Jumu'ah. Any slaves not obligated to go to Jumu'ah. Okay, this is specifically for those who are free, those who are do not have anything preventing them, no mani' that would prevent them from attending Jumu'ah itself. Does anyone have any questions thus far? Anyone with any questions thus far? The question is can younger people not pray Jumu'ah at a school due to the Jama' rule? I'd say that falls into the realm of fatwa. That falls into the realm of fatwa. Like in min shurut al-Jumu'ah, as we have learned in terms of what the Malikis argue, لا أدري, I don't know about the other madhab, so maybe they can reference another madhab. Maybe the qawl in the school that I'm not sure of. Allahu a'lam. I don't want to tell people that their prayers are invalid or so forth. I would say to them, review the fatwa correctly. Ensure that you have someone who who can properly walk you through the Jum'ah being at a school. Yeah, is that Jum'ah is public, that anybody can attend it. So can anybody on the street attend Jum'ah at your high school? Can the uncle across the street walk into your school and say, I would like to pray Jum'ah for students? I don't believe so. I think people will deny this and not allow it for safety concerns or whatever it is. Right. Likewise, at a university, it's not a masjid, right? So we may not consider it that. Lakin, another school might have a different opinion. I don't want to be somebody who's speaking on behalf of others. Like, it is obligatory to attend the Jumu'ah when the adhan sounds. So as soon as you hear the adhan for Jumu'ah, إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ. So as soon as you hear the adhan for Jumu'ah, you're obligated to go to the masjid. Okay? As soon as the time comes in, you must go to the masjid. The person who is further away must take into account the travel time that it takes them to get to the masjid. If there is any trade, any kind of sales that are made during the time of Jumu'ah, all of those sales are invalidated. All of the sales are invalidated. And any action that distracts one from setting off for Jumu'ah becomes haram. And so, for example, if you're about to sell a car, you hear the adhan for Salat al-Jumu'ah, you stop the sale, you pause it, and you say, we're going to pause here. After Salat al-Jumu'ah, we'll come back and sign the paperwork. We'll finish our conversation. Okay? You don't continue with the sales talk. From the mustahabbat elements of Jumu'ah, from the sunnahs of Jumu'ah is to do ghusl immediately before setting out. If one sleeps or if they eat lunch or the like after ghusl and before setting out for Jumu'ah, the ghusl must be repeated. So the best is to do ghusl and immediately leave the home. Lakin it's a sunnah. If you don't do ghusl and it's Jumu'ah, do you have a sin? No, there's no sin. Right? There's no sin necessarily. From the mustahabbat elements of Jumu'ah are to go at midday. To be well dressed. To apply perfume, and this is for the men only. The women should not be doing so. The hukm on women going to Jumu'ah is all mustahab. It's mustahab for them to go to Jumu'ah. Lakin it's not obligated. We're able to go to the masjid. And it's not a requirement. Number 4 is to be well groomed. What we would say to apply the elements of the fitrah, meaning to trim the mustache, to cut the nails, to shave off any pubic hair or armpit hair, to brush your teeth, to make sure that you are clean without any najasa or any bad smells. It's disliked to go to the masjid and your breath stinks and your body and your thobe stinks unless if you cannot help it. For example, you are some sort of worker, a painter, maybe you are a garbage worker or something like that. You have some difficulty in terms of your bodily smells, and that's another story. Like if you're able to prevent such a thing, it's disliked. A group of people. Now, after this, the Musannif, rahimahullah, he moves into the discussion on الصلاة في الجماعة. الصلاة في الجماعة. He says, rahimahullah, شرط الإمام ذكر مكلف بآلاء ركنه وحكما يعرف. Until the end of this section, he says here, number 1, let's go down here. He says, of the Imam, the first requirement is that he must be a male. And this is important because when he converses or talks about Salat al-Jama'ah, the understanding here is that it comes at the tail end of the discussion of Salat al-Jumu'ah, okay? Of Salat al-Jumu'ah. So Salat al-Jama'ah itself, being that it's what number 1 Salat al-Jumu'ah is, but also for the other prayers that we have mentioned before, that there is benefit in them, that there is good in them, and so on. This is Salat al-Jama'ah becomes the bread and butter of the Ummah. And we should always be trying to pray Salat al-congregation. We should be to pray as little alone as possible and with groups, and especially the best is to pray in the masjid. So Salat al-Jama'ah is a group of people that, and this is obligatory. This is obligatory for it to be considered Salat al-Jama'ah. If I prayed by myself, Salat al-Jama'ah, la, mustahil. The other matter is that for all salah, obligatory salah, it is a sunnah to pray in Jama'ah. But for Salat al-Jum'ah, it's an obligation. For Salat al-Jum'ah, it's an obligation. But for all the other prayers, it's a sunnah. The reward for Salat al-Jama'ah is approximately 25 to 27 times the reward for praying alone. So if one catches even a single rak'ah with the Imam by doing ruku', with stillness and like a full ruku' before the Imam from his ruku', they've been able to catch 25 to 27 times reward. It is mustahab as well to repeat an obligatory salah that was previously done alone with the Imam. Likewise, it is in the opposite way. It is extremely disliked for one to pray salat alone in the masjid, and they should leave the masjid if the Imam is praying Jama'ah. The idea here is not to create a secondary Jama'ah that is competitive with the Imam. In order for the salah to be valid, the Imam must fulfill obligations. But to backtrack a little bit, recalling here, if you are praying Salat al-Jama'ah, if you are praying alone, and you are praying Salat al-Maghrib, there is no repeating Salat al-Maghrib if another Jama'ah comes in, because it is a witr salah. It is an odd amount of rak'at. For Salat al-Isha, if you prayed Salat al-Witr, there's a difference of opinion if whether or not you can repeat Salat al-Isha. Right? Some say yes and some say no. And if they yes, they also disagree. Should they repeat the witr after Isha again or not? Right? These are like secondary issues. If you pray Salat al-Isha, khalas, you prayed Salat al-Isha. If you prayed Salat al-Maghrib, khalas, you prayed Salat al-Maghrib. Like if you were praying Dhuhr or Asr, repeat it. Khalas, repeat it. If you are in the Jama'ah, you're praying in the masjid, you come in, right? You heard the adhan go off on your phone. You went to the masjid, you prayed, then you say Assalamu alaikum, and you see the Imam walking in, and he's about to lead the prayer. You get up, and you stand next to the Imam. What if somebody is praying after the Imam, after the Salah is done, and there's somebody who stands up after the Salah because they're making up missed parts of the prayer. They're making up parts of the prayer. Maybe they missed rak'ah, right? They came in late to the Salah. Can he be my Imam? We'll learn it in a moment. But he cannot be my Imam. Why? I cannot follow him in prayer. Why? Because he does not, first of all, he was following another Imam. From the Imam is that he is the Imam alone. The Imam doesn't follow another Imam. So we cannot take the prayer or take an Imam who is following another Imam. Rather, there's one Imam. That's it. So we said from the conditions of the Imam, number one is that he must be male. Number two is that he must be a mukallaf, cannot be a child. Prayer behind the child is invalid. The person who is leading the prayer must not be insane, must not be intoxicated, cannot be a child. This is all under the obligation of taklif. It is not permitted to make a child lead a nafila salah. But if it does happen, it's still valid. For the obligation salah, it must be an adult. Number three, that they are physically capable of performing the obligations of the salah itself. So the Imam who is physically incapable to stand, or physically incapable to sit, or physically incapable to read, or whatever it is, from the obligations of the salah, you cannot follow him in prayer. So there are some people, for example, they sit on a chair because they have bad knees or they have a bad back, right? During the obligated parts of the prayer, or they're sitting on the floor. They cannot be the Imam. They cannot be the Imam. If this is in your household, then he'll lead the prayer. If it's a husband and a wife, then the wife prays alone and the husband prays alone. They do not pray together. If this is an issue, they can go to the masjid and pray behind a jama'ah there. After this, after this, number 4 is to have ma'rifatul ahkam, or to be someone who has adequate knowledge in regards to the rulings of the prayer. The Prophet ﷺ said, the one who leads the people is the most knowledgeable of the book of Allah. And if they are equal in recitation, then the one most knowledgeable of the sunnah, and so on. There is a specific order. There's a specific order. But the idea here is that the most knowledgeable is the one who leads the prayer. Then if that person is not available or they're equal, then it's the most knowledgeable in Quran. And there's an order, right? That comes after that. I guess it's not necessary for our conversation today because it delves into a little bit more of an extended discussion. Also, this extends to rulings in regards to wudu and ghusl. The one who leads the salah must be a faqih, or the most learned of the congregation. Because salah is about rulings. It is not about who has the best recitation in Quran. It is about who is the most knowledgeable and how to conduct and lead the prayer. Bas, full stop. From what the imam must not be. Number 1, he must not be an open fasiq. If you have any imam who owns a casino and is a degenerate, publicly degenerate gambler, and tells people, come down to my casino on Route 98, you cannot follow this imam in prayer. If you have an imam who owns a liquor store and sells liquor, this is open fasiq. You cannot follow this individual in prayer. The reality is, if he performs wrong actions, this has 2 levels. If the wrong actions are not connected directly to the salah, the follower should repeat the salah in the time, and one should not take him as an imam. If the wrong action invalidates the actual salah, it must be repeated. For example, he showed up to the prayer drunk. The second category, if he has a deviated aqīdah, this has 2 levels. The ulama say, if there isn't like, for example, an ijma' on whether this imam's beliefs constitute kufr, the follower must repeat the salah in the ikhtiyari time, and one should not take him as an imam. If his kufr is clear, all salah behind him is invalid and it must be repeated. It must be repeated. The next category for what the imam must not be is a person who mispronounces the Quran as a type of lahan. The person who unintentionally mispronounces the salah behind him is still valid, but it is haram to take him as imam if there is a person who can recite correctly. Right? When we were talking earlier about having the best fiqh person lead, the understanding here is that that best fiqh person also has correct tajweed and makharij. He doesn't necessarily need to be a hafiz of Quran, but he can definitely be somebody who memorized, for example, juz' amma, and his tilawa is perfect. His tajweed rules are correct, and his makharij are correct. Like, and if somebody comes in and begins to mispronounce letters and words and so on, the Mālikīyyah, they say, one who has better pronunciation should be in front of you. Number 2 is the person who intentionally mispronounces. His salah and the salah behind him are all invalid. His prayer is invalid, and the people behind him, their prayer is invalid. The third category here is the person who is unable to pronounce and who cannot learn because of some sort of defect. The salah behind him is valid, but it is haram to take him as an imam if there is a person who can recite correctly in the community. The next category under the category of lahan, or the next point under the category of lahan, is if the person who is able to pronounce correctly and does it, he should always be given precedence as an imam. So there is some flexibility in terms of having some sort of defect in your recitation. There are certain cultures or sub-communities, for example, they're not able to pronounce every single letter of the Quran. Second, the understanding here, brothers and sisters, is that if you are an imam and you are leading prayer, your recitation should be in accordance with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed. And because Arabic is a precise language, a mistake in the letters and words and mispronunciation can affect an entire meaning of a verse if you are not careful, right? So it is very, very important for us to prioritize those who are able to read the Quran correctly and know proper fiqh. That's who the imam should be. Now, I guess this is number 7 like in from the beginning of the list. But the next point that an imam should not be is he must not be a follower of another imam, which goes back to what I was saying earlier, meaning that this person he missed one or more rak'at with the imam, and they cannot follow another another latecomer cannot follow them, or they cannot follow another latecomer together from the prayer. This is all invalid. We cannot be following somebody who is a latecomer to the salah and taking this in the masjid of people making this error, and it's incorrect. It's incorrect. The prayer is invalid. So what should be conducted is that when you enter into the masjid, if you will prayer, you go and you begin your salah. If you catch the prayer but you're late for some of the parts, the obligatory parts of the salah, then you should take up the obligatory parts of the salah. In terms of salat al-Jumu'ah, the imam cannot be a slave, nor can he be a traveler, as we mentioned earlier. Why? Because Jumu'ah is not obligatory for them. Next, we move into the makruhat for the imam. Makruhat for the imam. Second, before I do this, let me just review your questions, inshallah. Does anybody have any questions in regards to what we were talking about here? All right, here we go. All right. Could you repeat what was said about the 25 to 27 reward? Man salla, whosoever prays salah in al-jama'ah, receives the ajr of there's 27 daraja. It's 27 levels for a reward, according to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Lakin for Salatul Jumu'ah, it is unique in that the Jama'ah for Salatul Jumu'ah is obligated, versus the other prayers, which technically speaking, an imam can walk into the masjid and if nobody's there, he can lead the salah all on his own, no issue. Or you can pray it on your own, like Salatul Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and Fajr. Those prayers can be prayed either in a group or alone, and it is a sunnah to pray in a group. In terms of it being a fasiq, the rulings are as follows. So if the imam performs wrong actions, it has 2 levels. So if the wrong actions are not connected directly to the salah, the follower should repeat the salah in the ikhtiyari time, and one should not take him as an imam. But if the wrong actions invalidates the actual salah, it must be repeated. So there are actions that are sinful, like openly sinful actions. Okay, if these actions do not necessarily invalidate the prayer, right? Then the person should be, for example, you prayed behind one imam, and then a minute later somebody walked in and said, a minute later, like right after the salah, he stands up and he says, "Listen, guys, I want to invite you all to my casino. We're gonna go gambling in a minute." It's a crazy prayer, crazy moment in your life. You probably look at him very confused and you think he's joking. He's serious, and you say, "Whoa, this is not really supposed to be the action of an imam." And he tells you, "It's okay. I'll take you to my liquor store first. Let's go." This is a shaitan. This is a shaitan. So you go and you repeat your prayer, um, and you should not be taking him as an imam. But if the imam, for example, came to the prayer drunk, came to the prayer drunk and was not able to fulfill the obligations of salah, right? This is a whole other problem, right? And so the prayer must be repeated. The prayer must be repeated because the prayer itself was not valid. The prayer itself was not valid. In terms of the deviated aqīdah, if, for example, it gets out that this person may or may not have a deviated aqīdah, okay? The scholars are in disagreement. The very fact that there is a disagreement from the scholars' perspective, it shows us that we should be taking caution. We should be taking caution with this individual. So, what this person should do is repeat their prayer every time, and they should not be taking him as an imam. But if there were prayers that happened outside of the ikhtiyari time, or like the prayer, let's say you prayed with him last week in the other masjid, right? And you found out now, technically your prayer isn't invalidated, right? But if his kufr is clear, all the salah behind them are invalid and they must be repeated. They must be repeated. Let's talk about what is makruh for the imam. Let's talk about what is makruh for the imam. Bismillah. Let's talk about what is makruh for the imam. It is makruh for the imam. That means blood or pus or so far or so forth from najasa from his body. Yani this is it's makruh for this individual. Like we reviewed that for example, the one with incontinence, they don't necessarily need to repeat their wudu due to their health condition. Number two, and this is something that yani some of the shuruhat that they bring up, uh, they say it's a country dweller. They bring up somebody who is from the badia or a country dweller. They're not necessarily from the Medina or from the Qura or from like the places that have civilization. They come from like way out where, right? The reason is that the country dweller does not normally perform jama'ah or even jumu'ah in the city that you reside in or the place that you reside in. So typically that person either is like a traveler or a temporary passerby. Number three, if the imam, it's makruh for the imam to be disliked by the people in the jama'ah because a matter of his deen, such as, for example, not paying debts, even though he can afford to. Number four, being paralyzed in one of his limbs, limping, unless it is minor, or missing a limb. Remember, these are matters that are makruh for the imam. If he still prayed, the prayer is valid. Number five, and this is something from the this is something that you see as a distinguished characteristic for the ulama, particularly in the Maghrib. You will never see a sheikh who is leading salah in North Africa who does not have some sort of cloak or some sort of cloth over his shoulders. So, for example, he will take nose. This is just like this is just like a cloth. But he will take his barnous and he will cover his shoulders. He will cover his shoulders and he will pray. He will pray with the covering over his shoulders. This cloak, if he does not pray with it, yani, said that it is disliked if he's leading the salah. It is also makruh to let the rows be broken up. So from the responsibilities of the imam before salah is that he turns around, and he makes sure that the rows are straight behind him. He makes sure the rows are straight behind him. It's possible that in a masjid, for example, it's a very large masjid. There are people who pray inside and outside and so on. So the condition here is that the lines and rows are connected. The lines and rows are connected. And you don't find, like, for example, 5 people praying in a courtyard, 10 people praying on the left of the masjid, 5 people praying on the right, and 20 in the middle. No, everybody should be connected in their roles. It should be organized, right? But some masajid, for example, especially like summertime, the inside of the masjid might be like scorching hot, for example. But due to the space and restrictions of whatever it is that the masjid has, some people might be praying in a different area for whatever need, right? And so the condition here is that the rows are connected. Number two, it's disliked to stand in front of the imam unless there is no space anywhere. Number three is to make a shana after the regular imam has already prayed. This is makruh. This is makruh to do. It's disliked. In fact, the person should leave the masjid. Should leave the masjid and pray somewhere else. That's the best that they can do. Or pray in a space that people would obviously know that you're not directly affected to the imam, or there wouldn't be any confusion or fitna that comes from what you're doing. So if imam is imam ratib, there is a difference between a regular imam and imam ratib. Imam ratib is the imam for all 5 prayers. He is the regular imam that leads the salah for most of the prayers in the masjid. Okay, it might be him, it might be 3 other people, right? But there are like 3 or 4 distinguished imams in the community who are constantly leading the salah and so on, right? So these are the imams that have a specific title or position in the masjid, and it is makruh that he is, for example, unknown to the people he leads. An imam ratib cannot be unknown. People need to know who he is. And it must be what I mean by that is that he must be known to the people in terms of his uprightness or his deviances or whatever it is, right? Number 2, he cannot be effeminate. This is very important, especially in the age of especially in the age of 2024. Okay, when we have, like, for example, people who are trying to be queer imams, or people who are trying to change genders or so forth. So the word is ma'boon. Ma'boon can also be possible that some translators or some people may understand it as being homosexual. But in this context, what we mean is that a person who there are rumors about that sometime in the past he engaged in some homosexual practices. Not that he is actually a homosexual, since that would make him ineligible as an imam. Okay, so if, for example, there were some rumors that, maybe when he was 15 he was a homosexual, or he was doing some sort of some acts that are unbecoming of a man, and so this would all be from what is disliked about him. Why is it disliked? Because he's made tawbah since that time. He's whatever it is, he made tawbah, transformed his life. He's now an imam, right? Versus the person who is saying, I'm publicly a fasiq, I'm a homosexual, I'm publicly a fasiq. This is what that person is saying. And so this individual, what? We just talked about it. Cannot be praying behind such a person. Khalas. Number 3, being uncircumcised unless if there is a valid excuse. Number 4 is being a slave. Number 5 is being castrated, meaning he's missing his testicles, or both. And number 6, having an illegitimate child that is born out of wedlock. That is a zani, and a zani should not be leading prayer. However, if there is no one available or free of the if there is no one available or free of the following defects, for example, it is permissible for the imam for him to be blind, to be and to be incapable of pronouncing some letters, or for him to be sort of leprous, someone who has leprosy and his illness is in sight. يعني لكن it's not severe. It's not severe. Okay? This has been a deep dive into what an imam is and isn't, and the rulings in regards to an imam. There's actually a lot to unpack, but it's very important for us to maintain the following, which is that we must have the utmost respect for the imam and the position of an imam, because, for a lack of a better term, they are in the position of our dear and beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of leading the prayer. They're responsible for being an example for the entire community. They're responsible for being the uswa, like the example for us as close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as they could possibly strive for and work towards at all times. The Imam must always be present in front of people, even if he's somebody who has sins, has mistakes, and we all do. Like he doesn't show it publicly to others. He doesn't declare to people, for example, I am addicted to alcohol. Everybody, please accept my sins. La la la. He never shows these kinds of things. These are immoral actions. These are immoral acts, and they should be hidden from the public view because it is a fitna for others. Rather, the Imam should be respected by his congregation, and he himself should have the respect to the role that he is in. He cannot. He doesn't have to be a perfect person, but he does not. But he should not be somebody who publicly shows his sins. And if somebody sees the Imam's sin or something of the like that he himself has not made public, this is an issue. This is an issue on part of the person who saw the sin. This is an issue, right? He may hate with the Imam in private, but he should not be creating public fitna with others. Unless if there is a serious need to do so. Right? And it should be handled correctly. Like we should be, for example, you saw him walk across a liquor store and he had a brown bag and a glass bottle inside. Maybe it was Coca-Cola, maybe it was root beer. I don't know what it is. Right? And that would be completely different than you seeing another sin. But we should always be making excuses for our brothers. Unless if it is very clear when we have went to scholars and other imams and other contemporaries of this individual, and we said to them, we saw him do XYZ. Do you have any knowledge of this? And I don't want to create a fitna and so on. And we would handle it correctly. But if there is a great sin and it's public and all of these things, it's a whole other story. Whole other story. طيب, with that being said, inshallah ta'ala, next week we will begin with the ahkam for the muqtadi. We will begin with the ahkam for the muqtadi. We're approximately at line 172 of the matn of Ibn Ashir. So for the muqtadi is the follower, or the ma'mum, excuse me. The ma'mum is the follower. The follower, he must follow the imam in everything that is related to the salah. And we'll talk about this, inshallah, next week. Before we wrap up, inshallah ta'ala, if anybody has any questions, you can add it to the chat, bi'ithnillah. Otherwise, what we could possibly do, I do see the comments for adding some sort of notes, inshallah ta'ala. We can create the notes so that way we have a nice little chart for us to review. Bi'ithnillah, no issues here. Like we ask that Allah Azza wa Jal forgives us for any errors that we said, and that He increases us in knowledge and ta'ah and sincerity to Him. Remember, brothers and sisters, that everything in terms of sincerity and ikhlas, it begins with an intention, a pure intention. And the Prophet ﷺ would make dua, and his actions would be khalisan liwajhi al-karim, khalis, yani sincere, solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we seek sincerity solely for the sake of Allah, and we ask for protection from al-fitan, from any fitna that might enter into our homes or enter into our lives. Allahumma ameen. With that being said, I believe this is a good Hasan. Inshallah ta'ala, next week, as we mentioned earlier, beginning with the rulings in regards to the ma'mum, the follower in the prayer, and we ask for tawfiq. وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وإلى لقاء آخر إن شاء الله تعالى. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.